They laughed at me, called me tech girl, who only knew how to code. 6 months later, they're paying $1.2 million a month to rent my system. I didn't need public recognition, I just needed the entire market to acknowledge the truth. My boss stole all my ideas without crediting me. The next day, their competitor signed a lifetime deal with me. My name is Emily Rourke. I'm 32, and until recently, I was just another software engineer at Veltrix Dynamics, a company specializing in AI platforms for transportation logistics. At least that's what everyone thought. What they didn't know was that I was the architect behind the revolutionary AI system that would eventually transform the entire industry. Looking back, I've always been the person who preferred working in the background, the quiet force, the one who solves problems while others talk about solving them. In the tech world, especially in Silicon Valley, that's not always an advantage. Here, visibility often trumps capability. But I was raised differently. My father, a brilliant engineer who never sought the spotlight, taught me that real innovation speaks for itself. I joined Veltrix 4 years ago when it was still a promising startup with about 50 employees. I was drawn to their mission of optimizing transportation networks using machine learning. The potential to reduce emissions while making logistics more efficient seemed like meaningful work. The company grew quickly, and 2 years in, we had over 500 employees and a valuation that had the venture capital world buzzing. As the company expanded, I remained focused on what I did best, building systems that worked. My role evolved from back-end developer to lead engineer on our core infrastructure team, while executives came and went, each adding their names to projects they barely understood. I stayed consistent, often working late into the night, perfecting the algorithms that became the backbone of our platform. Last year, I began developing something different, something transformative. It started as a side project, an experiment in using reinforcement learning to create adaptive logistics networks that could reconfigure in real time based on thousands of variables. Traditional logistics systems relied on predetermined routes and schedules with minimal flexibility. My system, which I called Vantis in my private notes, could dynamically rebuild entire supply chains on the fly, accounting for weather patterns, traffic fluctuations, fuel costs, and countless other factors simultaneously. When I first mentioned the concept to my direct manager, Jason, he seemed intrigued but overwhelmed by the technical details. "Sounds complicated, Emily. Maybe simplify it for the next leadership meeting." I nodded and went back to my desk, knowing that simplify meant make it digestible for executives who don't understand the technology. I spent months refining the model. Weekdays at Veltrix, working on our existing platform, weekends and nights at my apartment building what would become Vantis. I didn't tell anyone the full scope of what I was creating, not my colleagues, not my friends, not even my girlfriend Sarah, who often fell asleep waiting for me to finish just one more test run. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m. After running simulations all night. The system successfully reconfigured a simulated global shipping network in response to a hurricane, earthquake, and labor strike all happening simultaneously. It not only maintained 94% of delivery efficiency, but actually reduced costs by leveraging alternative routes and transportation methods that human planners would never have considered viable. I stared at my screen, the blue light illuminating my small home office, and realized what I had created. This wasn't just an improvement on existing technology, it was a complete paradigm shift. The next day, exhausted but exhilarated, I scheduled a meeting with Darren Volker, our CEO. Darren had joined Veltrix 2 years earlier, bringing Silicon Valley star power to our growing company. He had the right pedigree, Stanford MBA, successful exits from 2 previous startups, and connections throughout the industry. What he lacked, according to whispers among the engineering team, was any real understanding of our technology. "Emily, right from the infrastructure team." He glanced at his watch as I entered his glass-walled office. "I've got 15 minutes before my next call." I explained the system as clearly as I could, showing him simulations and data visualizations I'd prepared. His expression shifted from polite disinterest to focused attention. "You built this yourself?" "No team," he asked, scrolling through my presentation. "Yes, it started as a concept I was exploring in my spare time. I've been working on it for about 8 months now. And it works. These efficiency numbers are real." They're from simulations. But yes, the model is sound. We'd need to integrate with actual logistics data to implement it fully. But the architecture. Let me stop you there, he interrupted, leaning forward. This could be exactly what we need for the Goldman presentation next month. Can you put together a more comprehensive demo by next week, something that shows the business impact more clearly? I nodded, both pleased that he recognized the potential and concerned about the timeline. I'll need some resources, server time, access to the full data lake. Whatever you need, he said, already typing an email. Just coordinate with Jason. This is priority now. Over the next 3 weeks, I barely left the office. With official resources now allocated to the project, I was able to scale up my simulations and integrate them with Veltrix's extensive data repositories. The results exceeded even my expectations. In every scenario, Vantis outperformed traditional logistics planning by significant margins. What I didn't share with Darren or Jason was that I had been simultaneously developing an enhanced version at home. The company version was impressive, but it was built on Veltrix's somewhat dated infrastructure. My personal version incorporated cutting-edge approaches I knew would never get approved through official channels, at least not without months of committee meetings and security reviews. I also took another step that, in retrospect, changed everything. On the advice of Sarah, who works as a patent attorney, I filed provisional patents for my core algorithms under my own name through a shell company I created called Northmere Systems. Just to protect yourself, she had said over dinner one night. Companies can be unpredictable. I didn't tell anyone at Veltrix about this. The employee agreement I'd signed gave them rights to work done using company resources or during company time. But my home system, the one with the truly revolutionary architecture, was built entirely on my own equipment, during my own time. As the Goldman presentation approached, the excitement at Veltrix grew. Rumors spread that we had something game-changing to reveal. The share price ticked upward on speculation alone. I found myself in more meetings with senior leadership, explaining technical details that were often met with glazed eyes, until I translated them into projected revenue impacts. 2 days before the big presentation, Darren called me into a meeting with the executive team. "Emily, great work on this project," he began. As I took a seat in our largest conference room, around the table sat our CFO, COO, CMO, and several vice presidents I rarely interacted with. "We've been reviewing the materials, and we think this could be the cornerstone of our strategy going forward." I nodded, feeling a flutter of pride despite my exhaustion. "We've made some adjustments to the presentation," he continued, bringing up slides on the large screen. "Simplified the technical aspects and emphasized the market implications." What followed was a 40-minute discussion about how to position the new platform to investors. Nobody asked me any substantive questions about how it actually worked. Instead, they debated messaging, competitor responses, and potential partnerships. "One more thing," Darren said as the meeting was wrapping up. "For tomorrow's all hands and the Goldman presentation, we think it's better if the executive team handles the presentation. The technical details might distract from the business story we're trying to tell." "You want me to brief someone else on the technical aspects?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "No need. We've got the high-level points covered. If there are technical questions afterward, we can bring you in." I left that meeting with a strange hollowness in my stomach. Something felt off, but I told myself it was just exhaustion combined with the letdown after months of intense work. That night, I mentioned my concerns to Sarah over takeout we barely touched. "Just watch carefully tomorrow," she advised. "Document everything, and remember that shell company we set up. Maybe it's time to think about what it could actually do." The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next day. All 500 employees gathered in the atrium of our building or joined via video conference. I found a spot near the back, curious to see how my work would be presented. Darren took the stage to enthusiastic applause. Behind him, the first slide displayed what he called Project Nexus, a name I had never heard before. "Today marks a pivotal moment in Veltrix's journey," he began. "For the past year, our leadership team has been developing a strategic vision that will redefine logistics management for the next decade." I felt my breath catch. The past year, the leadership team. What followed was essentially a description of Vantis, though simplified and rebranded, Slide after slide showed the capabilities I had built, the problems I had solved, the architecture I had designed, all presented as the culmination of our executive team's strategic vision. Not once was my name mentioned. Not once was there any acknowledgement that this was the work of an engineer rather than a strategic initiative from leadership. When technical details were discussed, they were attributed to our engineering team or our AI division. I sat motionless, my face carefully blank, as Darren explained my own creation to me and everyone else. Around me, colleagues nodded, impressed by what they were hearing. A few who had peripheral knowledge of my project glanced my way with confused expressions, but most had no idea. After the presentation, there was a standing ovation. Veltrix was positioned to revolutionize the industry. Our stock would surely soar. Partners and customers would line up, and I, the person who had actually built the system being celebrated, sat quietly, already making plans. As the crowd dispersed, Jason approached me. "Pretty exciting." "Huh, I had no idea how big this would become when you first mentioned it." "Neither did I replied, keeping my voice even. "Funny how things evolve. Darren wants the core team to join the Goldman presentation tomorrow. You'll be there, right?" "Of course," I smiled. "I wouldn't miss it." That afternoon, I went through the motions of preparing for the next day's presentation. I answered technical questions from the marketing team, reviewed slides, and nodded at appropriate intervals during last-minute planning meetings. At 6 p.m., when the office began to empty, I methodically removed all personal items from my desk. Nothing obvious. Just a plant, a few books, a spare phone charger. I wiped my development environment from my work laptop and replaced it with the company-approved version, carefully removing any trace of the advanced features I had implemented at home. I then sent 3 emails a meeting request to Melissa Chen, the CTO of Redpoint Core, Veltrix's largest competitor, a brief note to Sarah with an attachment labeled "Just in Case," and a standard end-of-day update to Jason mentioning that I was taking the morning to prepare for the Goldman presentation and would meet the team there. By 7:30 p.m., I had left the Veltrix building for the last time. Though nobody yet knew it, not even me. With complete certainty, what happened next would depend on how a different meeting went. The following morning, while Darren and the executive team were finalizing their presentation for Goldman Sachs, I sat in a small conference room at the Four Seasons, across from Melissa Chen. Melissa had a reputation for technical brilliance combined with business acumen, a rare combination that had helped Redpoint Core maintain its market leadership despite challenges from upstarts like Veltrix. "You've got 30 minutes, she said after brief introductions. "And I'll be honest, Emily, poaching talent from competitors isn't usually my style, but your email was intriguing." I opened my laptop. "I'm not here to be poached, Melissa. I'm here as the founder and CEO of Northmere Systems." Her eyebrow raised slightly. "Never heard of it." "You will," I said, launching my presentation. "Northmere owns the intellectual property rights to an adaptive logistics system called Vantis. I believe it will interest you." What followed was not the simplified, market-focused presentation Darren had prepared. Instead, I showed Melissa exactly what my system could do: the technical architecture, the algorithmic innovations, the learning capabilities that allowed it to adapt to almost any scenario. 20 minutes in, she held up her hand. "Stop. This is either the most elaborate fraud I've ever seen or—" She paused. "How close is this to what Veltrix is announcing today?" "The concepts are similar," I replied carefully, "but what Veltrix is presenting is essentially a prototype with limited capabilities. What I'm showing you is the fully realized system, with proprietary elements that aren't included in their version. And you own this legally." I slid a folder across the table. "Provisional patents filed 9 months ago. Development done on personal equipment, on personal time. My employment agreement with Veltrix has been reviewed by 3 separate attorneys who confirm my ownership of this specific implementation." Melissa paged through the documents, her expression unreadable. Then she closed the folder and looked at me directly. "What are you proposing exactly?" "Northmere Systems offers 2 options," I said, feeling strangely calm despite the enormity of what I was doing. "A licensing agreement that gives Redpoint Core exclusive access to Vantis for implementation within your existing infrastructure, or a partnership where Northmere remains independent but works exclusively with Redpoint to deploy and further develop the system. And the cost. I named a figure $1.2 million monthly licensing fee plus performance-based royalties that I had calculated would be simultaneously shocking and justifiable based on the projected ROI. Melissa didn't flinch. You realize that if what you're showing me is legitimate, and if your legal position is as solid as you claim, this would essentially render Veltrix's announcement today meaningless. I'm aware of the implications. She studied me for a long moment. Why not just confront them, claim credit publicly? That would be simpler than setting up a competing entity. I had asked myself the same question many times over the past 24 hours. Because this isn't about credit or recognition, it's about building something meaningful and ensuring it's implemented properly. The system Veltrix is presenting today is a compromised version that prioritizes quick market impact over long-term sustainability. That wasn't the whole truth. Of course, there was also the bitter taste of betrayal, the months of work claimed by others, the fundamental unfairness of it all. But those weren't professional reasons, and this was a professional meeting. "I'll need our technical team to verify your claims," Melissa said finally, "and our legal department will want to review everything thoroughly. Of course, I've prepared a secure development environment where your team can test the system with simulated data. As for legal review, I'm ready whenever your team is." By 2 p.m. that afternoon, right around the time Darren would have been taking the stage at Goldman Sachs, I was sitting in Redpoint Corp's legal department, answering detailed questions about Vantis's development timeline. By 6 p.m., their technical team had confirmed that my system not only worked as claimed, but significantly outperformed anything they had seen before. By 9 p.m., I was signing preliminary agreements that would form the foundation of a partnership between Northmere Systems, my company, and Redpoint Corp, the industry leader. The terms were beyond anything I had dared to hope for. $1.2 million monthly for the exclusive license to integrate Vantis into Redpoint's platform, plus 3% royalty on all revenue generated through its implementation. Northmere would remain independent, with me as CEO, working closely with Redpoint's technical teams on implementation and future development. As I signed the final document, Melissa extended her hand. "Welcome to a very different future. Emily, I have to ask what made you reach out to us specifically." "Your technical reputation," I answered honestly. "You're known for understanding the value of innovation, rather than just its marketability." She nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "What happens tomorrow with Veltrix?" "That depends on them," I said. "My attorney will be delivering a cease and desist letter first thing in the morning, informing them of Northmere's patent position and the agreement with Redpoint. What I didn't mention was the second document that would be delivered alongside it, a detailed timeline showing the development of Vantis, including logs, commits, and documented evidence of how the project had evolved first as my independent work, then as a Veltrix initiative where my contribution was systematically minimized until it disappeared entirely. The next morning, I didn't watch Veltrix's stock price. I didn't check news sites for reports on their Goldman Sachs presentation. Instead, I met with Redpoint's engineering leadership to begin planning the integration of Vantis into their infrastructure. It was Sarah who eventually called me with updates. Around lunchtime. "It's happening," she said, her voice a mix of awe and vindication. "Veltrix shares dropped 11% on the news of the cease and desist. There are already analysts questioning the legitimacy of their breakthrough technology. Darren issued a statement calling it a baseless claim from a disgruntled former employee." Former. "They're moving quickly," I noted, feeling oddly detached from the unfolding drama. "Emily, this is going to get messy. Are you prepared for that?" I considered the question seriously. "Not particularly, but I'm prepared to stand by my work and the documentation we've assembled. Beyond that, we'll see." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Northmere Systems went from being a shell company to a real entity, with offices, a small staff, and a singular focus on developing and implementing Vantis. I hired 3 engineers I trusted from previous jobs, each signing stringent confidentiality agreements and receiving generous equity packages. Veltrix, meanwhile, was in trouble. After the initial stock drop, investors began asking pointed questions about the technology that had been so prominently featured in their growth strategy. When technical details were requested, The answers were vague or inconsistent. Customers who had been primed to adopt the new platform now hesitated, waiting to see how the dispute with Northmere would resolve. Darren launched a PR offensive, portraying me as an employee who had stolen company technology, but the timeline didn't support his claims, and my meticulous documentation showing development of the core algorithms months before I ever mentioned the concept at Veltrix was difficult to refute. 3 weeks after my meeting with Melissa, Redpoint Core publicly announced its partnership with Northmere Systems to implement revolutionary adaptive logistics technology. The press release didn't mention Veltrix directly, but the timing and description made the connection obvious to industry observers. I declined all requests for interviews or public comments. When reporters called, I referred them to our legal team or to Redpoint's PR department. My focus remained on the technology itself, ensuring that Vantis was properly implemented and beginning work on enhancements that would extend its capabilities even further. The real validation came when Redpoint demonstrated the system at Tech Logistics, the industry's premier conference. While I didn't attend personally, our technical documentation and architecture diagrams were prominently featured in their presentation. Online. Logistics experts and AI researchers began analyzing what limited information was available, with many concluding that the approach represented a genuine paradigm shift. Meanwhile, Veltrix struggled to deliver on the promises made during their Goldman Sachs presentation. Their version of the technology, the simplified, compromised version I had left behind, had fundamental limitations that became apparent when they attempted to scale it to real-world applications. 2 months after my departure, Veltrix's board called an emergency meeting. The stock had fallen 43% from its peak. Major customers were delaying planned implementations, and the legal battle with Northmere was consuming resources with no clear path to resolution. The outcome, reported in business publications the following day, was predictable. Darren Volker had been removed as CEO, effective immediately. His replacement was Karen Albridge, the company's chief operating officer, who had a reputation for operational excellence and integrity. I received an email from Karen the same day the announcement was made public. "Emily, I believe we need to talk. This situation benefits neither Veltrix nor the broader industry. Would you be willing to meet, as a first step toward finding a resolution?" I considered ignoring it. Northmere was thriving. Vantis was being successfully implemented at Redpoint, and our legal position remained strong. There was little to gain from engaging with Veltrix at this point. And yet, there was something in Karen's approach direct, professional, acknowledging the reality of the situation that resonated with me. I had never worked directly with her at Veltrix, but her reputation suggested someone who valued substance over appearance. After consulting with Sarah and our legal team, I agreed to a meeting on neutral ground, a conference room at our lawyer's offices in Palo Alto. Karen arrived precisely on time, accompanied only by Veltrix's new general counsel. She looked tired but focused, her handshake firm as we greeted each other. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began once we were seated. "I want to start by acknowledging that mistakes were made in how your contributions were handled at Veltrix. That's not in dispute." I nodded but remained silent. "The question now is how we move forward. The current situation with competing implementations of similar technology and ongoing legal battles isn't ideal for anyone, including customers who could benefit from this innovation." "What are you proposing?" I asked. "A settlement that recognizes your intellectual contribution while allowing Veltrix to license aspects of the technology for specific market segments. Northmere and your partnership with Redpoint would remain intact, but we would establish boundaries that allow both entities to succeed in their respective areas." It was a reasonable opening position, more reasonable than I had expected, but it also revealed how desperate Veltrix's situation had become. Any agreement would need to include full recognition of Northmere's patents and my role as the system's architect, I said. No more presentations about leadership vision that erase the actual innovation process. Karen nodded without hesitation. Agreed. Transparency and proper attribution would be central to any arrangement. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with both sides outlining potential frameworks for cooperation. No final decisions were made. This was just a preliminary discussion, but it established a foundation for further negotiations. As we were concluding, Karen asked a question that caught me off guard. "May I ask, Emily, was there a point where this could have been prevented?" where a different approach from Veltrix might have kept you and your innovation with us. I considered the question carefully. Recognition matters, I said finally. Not public acclaim or awards, but basic acknowledgement of contribution. When people build something meaningful, they need to see themselves in it somewhere. She nodded slowly. That's a lesson we're learning the hard way. 3 weeks later, after intensive negotiations, Veltrix and Northmere announced a settlement agreement. The terms were complex, but centered around a few key points. Northmere's patents were recognized as valid. Veltrix would license specific applications of the technology for a substantial fee, and both companies would collaborate on establishing industry standards for adaptive logistics platforms. The announcement included an unusual element, a joint statement acknowledging me as the primary architect of the technology now being implemented by both companies. It wasn't an apology, but it was a public correction of the record. Veltrix's stock stabilized following the announcement. Though it remained well below its previous highs, Redpoint continued to benefit from their first-mover advantage with the full Vantis implementation, and Northmere grew steadily, adding talent and expanding our research into new applications of adaptive AI beyond logistics. 6 months after my last day at Veltrix, I received an invitation to attend a joint presentation by Redpoint and Veltrix under Karen's leadership at the Goldman Sachs Technology Conference, the same event where Darren had planned to announce his breakthrough a half-year earlier. I debated not attending. My focus had shifted to Northmere's next generation of innovations, and revisiting the Veltrix chapter held little appeal, but Sarah convinced me it would provide closure. So I registered as an attendee, not as a presenter. The presentation was scheduled for the main hall, with several hundred investors, analysts, and industry executives in attendance. I found a seat near the back, just as I had at that all-hands meeting that now seemed like a lifetime ago. Karen took the stage alongside Melissa from Redpoint. Behind them, the first slide displayed the logos of both companies, along with Northmere's. I felt a strange disconnect seeing the company I had created in my apartment, now featured alongside industry giants. Today, we're announcing a framework for collaboration that will accelerate the adoption of adaptive logistics technology across global supply chains. Karen began. This partnership represents not just a business agreement, but a commitment to innovation done right. The presentation that followed outlined how the companies would implement compatible systems while maintaining their competitive differentiation in specific markets. Technical slides showed architecture diagrams I recognized as my work, with my name clearly credited. Toward the end, a slide appeared with a simple title, Innovation Recognition. Below it was a list of patents related to the technology, with my name as primary inventor. Beside it was an image of the Northmere logo and a brief bio identifying me as the system architect and Northmere's founder. Transformative innovation rarely comes from boardrooms or strategy sessions, Karen said, gesturing to the slide. It comes from engineers and researchers who see possibilities others don't. Our industry needs to get better at recognizing and nurturing that talent, not just extracting value from it. There was applause, and I noticed several people glancing around the room, perhaps wondering if I was present. I remained still, feeling neither triumph nor vindication, just a quiet satisfaction that the record had been corrected. After the presentation, as the crowd dispersed for the networking reception, Melissa spotted me and made her way over. "The elusive Emily Rourke," she said with a smile. "I half expected you not to show. I almost didn't. Well, I'm glad you did. People should see that you're a real person, not just a name in a legal battle." She gestured toward the stage, where Karen was speaking with a group of investors. "She's done good work cleaning up the mess Darren left," I nodded. "Credit where it's due." "Speaking of credit," Melissa continued, "we're announcing the first major customer implementation next month. Your system is performing even better than projected in real-world conditions. The team would love you to be part of the announcement." I considered it briefly before shaking my head. "I think I'll leave the spotlight to the implementation team. They're doing the hard work now." Melissa studied me for a moment. "You really don't care about the recognition, do you?" "This was never about that. It was about building something that works," I said simply, "and ensuring that the truth is acknowledged. The spotlight doesn't interest me." As I left the conference center that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past year. I had gone from being just a coder, a technical resource, to be utilized but not credited to the founder of a company whose technology was now generating over $1 million monthly in licensing fees alone. But the true satisfaction came not from the financial success or the professional vindication. It came from knowing that the system I had built was being implemented properly, that it was making a real difference in how global logistics functioned. And it came from the knowledge that I had stood up for the truth, not through public confrontation or character assassination, but by simply creating something undeniably valuable and ensuring its proper attribution. In the end, they had called me just a coder, because they didn't understand that code is where the real innovation happens, not in marketing decks or investor presentations, but in the quiet hours when engineers solve problems that others don't even recognize exist. Now, those same people were paying $1, $2 million a month to access the infrastructure I had built. And more importantly, they were acknowledging publicly and permanently the truth about its creation. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed the system to work, and the truth to be recognized. In the end, I got both. As I waited for my rideshare outside the conference center, I received a text from Sarah. "How did it go?" I thought for a moment before replying. They put my name on the slides. Her response came quickly. "That's it, after everything. That's all you have to say." I smiled as I typed, "That's all that matters. The rest is just noise." And it was true. In an industry obsessed with perception, I had focused on reality, building something that worked so well it couldn't be ignored or diminished. The success of Vantis spoke for itself, far more eloquently than I ever could. My rideshare arrived, and as we pulled away from the conference center, I caught a final glimpse of the Redpoint and Veltrix logos illuminated on the building. Beside them, smaller but unmistakable, was the Northmere symbol, a simple representation of interconnected nodes that I had designed myself. Sometimes, I reflected, the quietest statement is the most powerful. I hadn't needed to fight for recognition. I had simply built something so essential that recognition became inevitable. They had called me just a coder. Now they called me an innovator, an architect, a founder. But in truth, I was still just a coder, and that had always been more than enough. The following Monday, I was back in Northmere's offices before most of the team arrived. We were working on extending Vantis's capabilities to new domains: healthcare logistics, emergency response systems, renewable energy distribution. The potential applications seemed limitless, each offering opportunities to make systems more resilient, more efficient, more adaptive to change. As I reviewed code from our newest engineer, a brilliant developer who had reached out after reading about our technology, I realized how much had changed in a year. From working alone in my apartment to leading a team of innovative thinkers. From having my work appropriated to having it celebrated. But the most important things hadn't changed at all. I was still solving problems through code, still finding satisfaction in systems that worked elegantly and efficiently, still preferring to let the results speak for themselves. My phone buzzed with a message from Melissa. WSJ wants to do a profile on the woman behind the logistics revolution. Interested. I typed back quickly. Pass. Suggest they profile the implementation team instead. They're doing the real work now. Her response made me smile. Somehow I knew you'd say that. One day you'll have to explain to me how someone who built $1 billion technology has so little interest in the spotlight. The answer was simple. Though I didn't share it with her, the spotlight doesn't improve the code. It doesn't make the algorithms more efficient or the systems more reliable. It's just light and heat, signifying nothing of substance. I put my phone away and turned back to my screen, already lost in the elegant logic of a new problem waiting to be solved. This, after all, was what I had fought for: not recognition or wealth, but the right to build something meaningful on my own terms. They had called me just a coder. I had proven that was more than enough.